Our speaker this evening is Randy Carter, a resident of Millwood community in Grayson County. He is perhaps the spokesman for Millwood. And just before this meeting started, I got his, I guess you call it resume, and I'm staggered. There's so much stuff here. He attended Millwood Elementary, graduated from Canesville High School in 1960. Attended Western Kentucky University. Randy, am I cutting into some of your speech here? Okay. A graduate of Belknap Hardware, School of Business and Sales. And he a graduate of the U.S. Army OCS at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Received a commission as a second lieutenant. Served in the Kentucky National Guard as a first lieutenant. He worked for General Motors. Attended lumber school, NAWAL lumber school in British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada. And he worked for a drop manufacturing company in Tomahawk Bay, Wisconsin. He's worked in Jacksonville, attended a school in Jacksonville. And in 1971, he opened Grayson County Auto Parts in Litchfield and served as the manager for 8 years. And in 1987, he opened Ohio Valley Reload in Millwood and continues to serve as owner and manager. He married Nancy Davis of Bowling Green, Kentucky in 1968. They have 2 children, Scott and Jackie Carter Lindsay, and 4 grandchildren. Well, I'll let Randy tell you about the rest of it.
Not much left. You know.
Well, you know about old folks Millwood.
I thought I'd maybe give you a little bit of reference to where I came from before I got to Millwood, the family. My grandfather Green, who several of you know, Walter, they migrated from Georgia just before the Civil War. My great-great-grandfather didn't believe in slavery, so he brought my great-grandfather Harvey and his 2 brothers to Bee Springs. Now, evidently they had a little bit of money because they bought the hotel and the store in Bee Springs. And later on they had 2 more stores, one at what we now call Wooligan Town and a little place called Golf. Well, about 3 or 4 years later, and by the way, none of this is documented. For some of you know who knew my Uncle Bertha, who died at 92, it may not be just exactly right if he told me. But anyway, my grandfather and I were real close, and they raised me. So Scott made a little comment. I said, "Son, why would you ask me to go up there and speak?" And he said, "Well, Dad, you know, you're getting old." And you know, a lot of people, old people. But anyway, they migrated to Bee Springs and had the 3 stores in the hotel when my grandfather was like 3 or 4 years old. Nancy and his grandfather Green. Well, along about 3 or 4 years after they moved there, someone burnt one of the stores one Saturday night and another one next Saturday night. So, I guess being disgusted with the loss, they sold out and moved to the vicinity of Millwood. Well, Dr. Sherman, who some of you know, and I think one lady said he delivered her.
He delivered me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And both of us.
Yeah.
But he built a store in Millwood up by the railroad track. I'm sure Aubrey remembers it. And my great-grandfather managed it for him for 4 or 5 years. And then he sold it to the Camel family. And ended up Mr. Esley Campbell ran it for several years. Then he, by the way, I worked for S. Campbell when I was 9 years old washing eggs for 2 cents a dozen. Pretty good job. Had several older people with families would come in and beg him to give, Dewey Cruz and I worked washing eggs together, to give him our jobs. You could make 40 cents a night. It wasn't bad. But you could buy a box of oatmeal and a loaf of light bread with that 42 cents and have money left over for a candy bar. Well, anyway, then Granddad Harvey came to Litchfield and ran the store where Small Engine is across from Embry's motorcycle or bicycle place there at the depot. Aubrey can probably remember that. And he ran it for several years, and he was offered a better job up at Summit, and he was the superintendent of mining at Rock facility at Summer of Black Rock. So that was about the end. I think after that he passed away at about 64 or 5 years old. The Green family doesn't live very long. So then my grandfather Green ran a grocery store in Millwood. I can remember it, so probably up until about 1945 or 6 or 7. I was born in 42. And how he got the store, my uncle, great uncle Gus, who worked at Ford's in Detroit, was a pretty big gambler. And he would ride the train through with his buddies, and they would go to St. Louis and gamble for a month or so. On the way back one time, he had quite a bit of money he'd won, so he and Granddad bought the store, and Granddad ran it until he got broke again. They sold it to Hardy Lehman, and that's Jenny Lehman Bird's family, which most of them know. So then Granddad moved back over on the farm where Ernie Johnson lived, the back of Millwood then. And he ran a little sawmill there in Millwood until he passed away at about 70 years old. On the other side, the Carters, they migrated from Carter County up in East Kentucky down the Ohio River to Cloverport. And how I know this, my great-grandfather died at 80, and I would ride with him when I was 8 years old and stay all night with him to the horse where they jockeyed horses. And he was a horse trader, and there was 3 of them, him and his 2 brothers, and they lived in the Duff area. And he told me vivid memories of rafting logs for the Green brothers down in the spring, down the Rough River to Wicklow, Kentucky. And there'd be like 6 or 7 of them on these log rafts. And when he got there, well, he would collect the money for the logs and then buy horses for the Green farms. And he said some of the guys would tend to parlors and first spend all their money, but he said, I'd always manage to buy horses with mine. When they got them back to Rough River, the horses that were broke to ride, they would pay them $5 for breaking those horses. So he said, had to go by my house, and I picked out the best horses and took the rest of them. So he's a pretty good horse trader. So he married one of the Purcells from down at Short Creek, Malcolm, and their aunt, I guess. Well, probably may have been, yeah, their aunt. And my grandfather was Roy Carter, not the Judge Roy. They were cousins. And he worked in Louisville, and probably some of you can remember this, not many of you, but he was a streetcar supervisor over the maintenance shop. When the Depression hit, they called all of the managers in, and I've heard him tell it lots of times, and said, now, Roy, you're making $12 a day. So starting Monday, you'll make $12 a week. And the ones working under you make $8 a day, so they'll make $8 a week. Now, you get all the free tokens to ride the streetcar you want, but that's it. And he said, I pondered it real hard about how was I going to tell the men. And he said some of them cussed, and kind of like the union dispute, I guess, in Wisconsin. How in the hell do you think I can live on $8 a week? And he only had, out of about 80 men, I think it was, less than 100, he only had 12 left Monday morning. So he goes to the higher-ups and says, what am I supposed to do? I don't have any help. And they said, just forget about it. We probably don't have the money to pay what you got. So he said after about 6 or 8 weeks, maybe a little longer, there would be people come and ask if they could come back to work. And he said, he asked the supervisor, and they said, yeah, anyone that comes back, let them come back to work. And he said that went on for 2 or 3 months, and said then you would see them slip up beside the door, and when you open the door, they just slip in. Said Friday they'd stand around to see if they were going to get their $8, but they would never ask for it. So I guess times has been pretty hard for some of the people older than us that remembers it. But that's about the Carter family. I left Millwood, I guess, right after high school, and went to Western, and then went in the Army. Lived in Louisville, Bowling Green, Louisville, Glasgow, and traveled out in Iowa doing my training with Belknap. We came back when, Nancy?
71.
Come in 71, and I opened the Napa store. Stanley Ragland and I opened the Napa store together, and then he passed away, and I ended up buying it. We sold it, I guess, in long about 80, I think. we farmed till we went broke, or we broke when we started. So anyway, we had to get out of the farming business. I worked for the railroad several years and ended up with the reload in Millwood with Ray Ragland, and I've been there ever since. A few things about Millwood. I tried to put together from memory and went down, and the oldest lady we have in Millwood today is Edna Miller, and she helped me put a few things together. Maybe they're right and maybe they're not. And then Dorothy Nancy and I went by and saw her Saturday or Sunday. She's 95, and she confirmed a couple of things we were working on. But Millwood was made up of 3 primary families. The DeHavens moved right in Millwood, there where the big house is. Aubrey, you remember what burnt like 2 years ago, the big house that the Crawfords and the Beechams lived in. They had about 600 acres, and they came from Cloverport, Hardinsburg, into Millwood. And then the Campbells, they moved down the railroad track where, are you who I think you are?
Now I'm Ruby Embry. No.
Right. Anyway, they built that big white house. You can remember that, I guess, can't you? The big 2-story house.
I was 3 years old when it burned.
Right, I can remember. But anyway, the Campbells built that big house there. And then the other Campbells moved over where Gilbert Carrier's estate was. Charlie Smith owns it now. And they built a big house. Each one of them, some way, had about 600 acres. Probably it was a land grant or something back then. But this was just prior to the Civil War and the building of the railroad. And, the Campbells were short-lived people. None of them lived to be over. Mr. Esley, I think, was only like 61 when he passed away there in Millwood. But they all deceased, and the farms were sold to Mal Emery. I think he ended up with the one farm, and then Richard Laceville has it now, and then the Carriers ended up with the other one. And then the Beecham farm has been split up, which we made a subdivision out of part of it, the grocery store and the community centers on the other part of it. But they were the biggest families, or I might say the richest families we've ever had in Millwood. We had a Mr. White from Shrewsbury who moved to Millwood probably right after the railroad was built in the 60s, and they started Bluegrass Cooperage. And they would buy staves for the whiskey barrel industry in Louisville, and ended up their family on Bluegrass Cooperage. The Dinwiddies were pretty instrumental in Millwood. They, the first steam engine that ever came to this part of the country was a Rumbly, and it was delivered by rail to Millwood, and the Dinwiddies drove it home. It's probably Joe Dinwiddie. And Joe had a brother who owned a tobacco warehouse in Millwood, and during the Depression, lost the warehouse, everything in it, sold for just a few pennies. It was worthless. So they were big. The other family that was big in Millwood later on was the Bonds lived in Caneville. They bought cross ties at Millwood for several years. And the reason Millwood exists, the railroad came to about where Danny Gary lives now. They used to call that Fred Hack Hill. And the reason they didn't go on was because of the tunnel up there. Aubrey, you remember the tunnel well. And just before the Civil War broke out, then they brought it on to Litchfield and tied it into the Louisville end of the railroad. But the main reason for Millwood, we're located in the hardwood heart of the world. Some of the best hardwood in the world right in this area, in the southeast of here. So cross ties was a big industry in this part of the country. And the reason they didn't do real good at Caneyville back then, you had to cross the creek to get to the railroad track, and that was about 3 or 4 months out of the year. But Millwood was easier to get to, and they hauled from Dinwiddie Farms and over around Wooligan Town. They'd haul them all the way to Millwood. And my grandfather Green hauled those for 10 cents a tie. And I've heard him tell about getting up at 2 o'clock, taking the ties to Millwood, unloading, and go back to Dinwiddie's and get a load, bring it to Millwood, and then go back and get a load and bring it home. So he could make 10 cents a tie, and he hauled 10 at a time. He could make $2 a day with team and wagon, you know, it wasn't doing too bad, I guess. Probably be equal, what, 150 today. Tell us about it, Mr. Hayes. What will it match up to? I saw him counting it up. But Millwood has had a up and down. Probably a lot of you don't know it, but Millwood has the finest clay for making fine china of anywhere in the world. Up until about 1930, we had a big clay pit just west on the railroad down the Carter Crossing. And they mined 2 railroad cars a day, 5 days a week, and it was shipped to Great Britain to make fine china. Now, Carl Goff owns that property now, and we were talking about it the other day. The old pits are still there, but it went under a big sandstone bluff, and the bluff fell off and tore up the railroad and everything. D. Carter was telling me, I think about 1936 or 37. But they hauled the clay to Millwood, where we had a brick kiln, or I guess you call it a kiln. I think there was 4 of those, looked like little Quonset huts where they killed the brick. And the best I can find out, and that was from Uncle Berthel, the brick that's in the old mansion over at the Dinwiddie Farm, which is falling down now, came from the brick kilns in Millwood. And they hauled that clay from down at Carter Crossing up there to make the brick. And we've had several industries in Millwood, none of them real big, I don't guess. If you want to call Black Rock part of Millwood, we had the Black Rock mines. They hauled the tar sands from Frame Church to Black Rock and mined those back up into about 1946, I think. That was one of the industries. Then along about 1947, Mulligan Coal Company out of Greenville, Kentucky, came to Millwood and opened a coal mine over on the Gilbert Carrier Farms, and they trucked it to Millwood and crushed it and sold coal. And that was a big industry, worked about 50 people up until about 53, I think, or maybe 54. So that was one of the better industries we had in Millwood. We had a large depot. Our depot at Millwood, I understand, was bigger than anyone from Beaver Dam up. It was a big depot. We had a huge stockyard, and Frank Adams Farms, Aubrey, and some of you remember Frank Adams, they would walk turkeys to Millwood and load them on railroad cars. So that was a big thing we had. I guess the best thing that ever happened to Millwood was Dr. Sherman came to Millwood in about 1921. And he was a big asset to the community. I remember when I was a little boy, you couldn't find a place to park. Even people would come in buggies there to be doctored. And then Dr. Emory came in 54 and did part of his internship, and then actually opened his office in 56. And he's still there, but he doesn't practice anymore. Most of you know him. So we had a pretty good medical profession for a little town like Millwood. You know, we had one chair, he'd pull your teeth. I had several teeth pulled when I was a kid. He'd deliver you. He was a very much a businessman. And we also had Dr. Knight came to Millwood. You probably remember Dr. Knight.
Who's my brother-in-law?
That's what I was trying to think, but I couldn't put it together. Dr. Knight was there for about 10 or 12 years, maybe longer. And he was a chiropractor and had a lot of people came to Millwood. We've had several stores in Millwood, the big store being Dr. Sherman's, which lasted for several years, and then Esley Campbell took it, and the Depression got him. And he would buy eggs, and we'd wash them for him and candle them and everything. And they say he actually hitchhiked to Fort Knox to sell the first case of eggs that he took up there. But he did that for about 10 years and was quite a businessman. Had a heart attack, passed away. The Crawfords opened the old big store there at the railroad, all rigged up next to the depot. And it was there for probably 70 or 80 years. Old man Buck, I guess he kept it open until he got to where he was 85 or 6 years old when he passed away. So that was a big industry we had. We had a hotel. Brian Dermott's, the old building, most of it's still standing. Someone's remodeled it. But we had a pretty nice hotel. And I think 5 rooms and a kitchen on the back where they would feed you. We had the Kinser boys. That was a big family in Millwood. Charlie B. and Efton was engineers on the railroad. I can remember when I was a little boy, they'd come through that fast train blowing the whistle. We had no outstanding people, but we had a lot of people that moved around. We made a pretty good turnaround. Copper's Company came in the 60s and opened a big sawmill, and they were cutting ties for the railroad. Then the Eskews came, and then Ohio Valley, which we still have, we came along about 1987, I think was it. We've been there about 21 years. We've had several little businesses. Harding Lane had a pretty good store down on 62, came through right after the Depression, and most of it was built with the WPA help and things, so that would have been in the 30s, 2, 3 or somewhere, I guess. So then Millwood moved down near the 62 for several years, and most everything up there on the railroad died until the Eskews and Kramer Lumber Company, which is a dry kiln right behind us, and then up. So it's been a come around little town. It was big in before the Civil War, selling cross ties, of course, and then it died off, and then it came back in the 50s or 60s when Kramer Lumber worked about 75 or 80 people. And now we've made another comeback. We've got a grocery store now, and we've got a Millwood Community Center, which some of you probably use from time to time. We even got sidewalks in Millwood now, so we've come a long way. We had the grade school, which left, I don't know, probably about 1960. No, it was before that, probably about 58 or 9 when the grade school left.
When the high school leave?
The high school left, I'll say now, Charles Green played basketball. Orville Green's dad played basketball at Millwood and went to Caneyville his senior year, so that probably was in the 30s. Matter of fact, Charles was a good enough basketball player. He got a full scholarship and went to Western. It wasn't called Western then, it was Kentucky Teachers College or something. I've seen his certificate where he graduated over. So that was probably the outstanding educator that we ever had from Millwood. But it's a good place to call home. It's not a very big place. I think we have 15 new homes in Millwood, and we're getting another new one started. Matter of fact, they're getting ready to dig the footer there on the highway. So we've made a comeback from when I was there. There was Mary can probably remember it, and the girls there, probably about 50 widow women in Millwood and very few men. When we were kids, it was mostly all widow women. But we've turned that now. We've got several young families, several kids starting to come again. And when I was going to Millwood, we had 15 kids in the 3rd grade. So it was a pretty good little community back then. But we had the Callen family, and a couple of them that had 21 kids. And then we had some boys that were 16 in the 3rd and the 4th grade. So but it's been a good little town. There's been a lot of things come and went, but I guess the biggest thing that ever happened when they had the coal mine strike, and they set the dynamite off about 2 o'clock in the morning and shook everybody up. That was probably the biggest thing that ever happened. So it's been a pretty good little town to live in and grow up in. Not a lot of excitement. We've had some good school teachers and things from Millwood. The SQ company, treatment company, they're still very active and treating a lot of lumber that comes in from Alabama and Georgia, and they treat it and then ship it on to the bigger company, Lowe's and 84 Lumber and some of those. So they are very important to Millwood. Orville Greens, you wouldn't believe it, one of the 10 biggest motorcycle salvages in the U.S. One of the 10 biggest. Very, very profitable. Does real good, and it's unbelievable where he sells motorcycle parts. Ohio Valley Reload, we probably for a while was the biggest thing around, and probably dollar-wise one of the biggest industries in Grayson County, even though people didn't realize it. We started in '87, and the first contract we landed was 40,000 ton of aluminum slab coming out of Kalispell, Montana, and we hauled it over to Hallsville. So that was a big shot in the arm getting us started. We primarily worked for the Burlington Northern Railroad, and they had a merger agreement over the Powell Railroad. It would bring it to Millwood, then we would truck it to wherever they wanted it, warehouse it, and that's how we got started. For about 4 years, we were the largest handler of Russian aluminum after the breakdown of communism in Russia. We were the largest handler of Russian aluminum anybody in the United States. I don't know how many thousand tons we hauled out of Mobile, Alabama that never did come to Millwood. At one time, we had $28 million worth of aluminum sitting on the yard there at Millwood. So we've been big, and now we're small, and I'm glad of it. But we have a lot of soda ash, and most of it we unload at Beaver Dam, Kentucky. It comes out of Bonneville, Wyoming. They mine it, it's 400 to 600 feet deep, and they mine it, grind it, put it on rails, ship it to Beaver Dam, and we haul it to Hewish and Bowling Green. They make dish detergent out of it. We haul some Brownsville, Tennessee. We haul it to near Indianapolis. We haul it to Mount Vernon, Illinois, and a couple other places in Illinois. And they use it for scrubbers in the coal-fired furnaces to make electricity. Also, in the process of refining gasoline, they use it as a neutralizer. So it's a number 5 chemical for its use in the world, including coal and the rest of it. So it's a pretty big thing. We've handled lumber. We even handled a load of hay from Wyoming during the drought several years ago and hauled it over to Park City to a dairy farm. We've tried a little of everything. Some of it's been successful and some of it hadn't, but we've been there 22 years, and a lot of people didn't know what we did or where we're at. We were real successful at times, and there's been very hard times too. We worked for a company called Hydro Aluminum out of Norse Hydro out of Norway. And we'd worked for them about 17 years. They bought all of the metal out on the northwest and brought it to Millwood, and then we warehoused it and delivered it wherever. We had a place in Louisville, Kentucky, down on 18th and Muhammad Ali, and we hauled several thousand tons from there to Reaganwood, West Virginia, which was a big move. We had a facility down in Mayfield, Kentucky. Wasn't very profitable, but we had it for 5 or 6 years. But the big move that we made for Hydro, they decided they wanted us to take over their logistics for their North American operation. They built a new plant at Henderson, Kentucky, and we did all their logistics. Trucking, I think we had 17, 18 tractors down there and about 60 or 70 trailers. Scott opened a factory when he came home from Pennsylvania, and we built big aluminum trailers. I think, what'd you build, 19 of them? And they're still running today for Hydro. We stayed with them about 5 or 6 years and had some problems with a guy they brought over here from Norway, and ended up at the end of that. But we worked for some big people and some small people. We never tried to go one way or the other, just whatever came down the tracks while we did it and went on. Ray Ragland was in with me till 10 years ago. He sold out and started a rock quarry, and stayed there till Houches bought him out, and now he's rebuilding cellular telephone towers all over the country. I called him the other day. They're 300 feet high, and I said, when you climb the first one, call me. I want it on a pretty day so I can take you a picture. And he said, you'll never have to come. But I guess that's about all there is about Millwood. There's probably some more, but it's not factual. It's not documented. Here's an old Millwood.
Yeah, now I remember when I was little, your Uncle Bertie and Aunt Dorothy ran a store at Millwood.
They had a store at Millwood also.
Yeah.
And then Buck Duval had the little store and a Texaco station in the garage.
I remember that too.
The Hermans, by the way, they had a restaurant, Aubrey can probably remember that, up at Doc Sherman's. And people would come there and they'd sell hamburgers and cokes and things, and they cooked for Doc and Miss Sherman. I worked for Dr. Sherman when I was 16. I drove for him one summer and helped him out. And we went down to the bank at Candyville and he got his lock boxes out and he said, "Why don't you sit down and help me count these?" And he had a stack of General Motors stock certificates about like that. So he was quite a businessman. But he stayed around Dr. Sherman. Sherman turned it over to Dr. Emery. Then he moved up. Most of you remember him moving up to Black Rock. But we've had some real good people come out of Millwood. We've still got some good people. It's kind of changing back to the younger generation, which it happens everywhere, you know. We've still got Miss Edna Newton Miller. She's the oldest lady in Millwood now. I believe she told me I was over Sunday to get some information. She's 85 or 6. And Aunt Desi lives there. She's 84. And then Aunt Dorothy Green, who you're talking about, is in a home in Louisville and doing quite well. But Millwood was a big hub. I'm sure Mr. Hayes can remember when you were a little boy. They unloaded railroad groceries at Millwood through the stores there in the depot and went to Shrewsbury and different short trips.
Before my time.
I thought it's the other way around. You took over the grocery business and put them out. I thank you all, and that's about all I can tell you. Yes.
About the bus running to Fort Knox.
That was Harnett Lane.
Yeah,
He ran that for about, I'd say about 10 or 12 years old, and probably would have gone on longer, but they were taking a bunch of kids to Kentucky Lake to the youth. Nancy remembers that.
You was on the bus.
Was you on the bus? They had a bad accident. A guy was hauling a bulldozer and the blade was sticking out and it tore the side out of the bus. And Mildred Wallace, Porter Wallace's daughter, cut her leg off. And she and I were real good friends. She passed away a few years ago, but that was a real bad accident, and then Harnett just quit after
Boy, I remember it.
I can remember that too.
Yeah.
When I was
bad.
Well, he hauled all the workers to Fort Knox for years.
That's what I was going to say. My brother-in-law lived in, we lived in Caneyville, and he would come to Millwood and catch the bus to go to Fort Knox.
Now, there was people that rode bicycles from Welch's Creek to Millwood and rode that bus to Fort Knox.
Away from Wilson.
I remember my grandfather talking about working at Cow Rock and walking from Millwood to Cow Rock. 11 cents an hour, and it leaves 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
My father-in-law helped make those cross ties that you were talking about when they built the first, or they built the corduroy roads, what they call it, from Litchfield. And he said, I can take you and show you different places, but it's still there.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen any of them, or you know what it's like?
Going down to the Embry farm, they, the old Campbell place, I guess was one that, but they put those cross ties down during the Depression with the WPA. And that road up until several years ago was still there, and it was a cross-tie road.
Yeah, that's what he
Laid them side by side.
He said they called it a corduroy road. Yeah,
It's like riding on.
yeah, he worked, he lived in Cairo.
Yeah, now where was the coal mine?
As you go out Pleasant View Road, when you get out to those big red barns, which is on with Charlie Smith now, that was the old Camel Estate, which became Gilbert Carrier's. And back right where the toll road is now, it went right through the middle of it.
Okay.
That was in, they hauled it to Millwood when I was a little boy. I think he started about 46 or 7 building the temple, and they ran to about 53, I think, something like that. Matter of fact, the house that our daughter lives in, we used to live in, it was the scale house. It has a little basement which the scales were in, and that was the scale house, and Dad bought that at 50-something and built a little house there, and we built onto it. But it was a pretty big business. They worked several people. They had a drag line they brought in. Norman Brown ran it.
Was it a strip mine?
Strip line, big strip. Some of the best coal, and it's a number 6 coal, which is real good.
I've heard that there was coal mined in that area, but I never had known exactly where it was.
Well, all along the Pleasant View Road, there was 2 mines over there. Shady Gibbons had a mine. That was later on in the 60s or 70s. And then on the White Farm, coming off Sue'sboro, there was a big operation there, and Mulligan moved over there and did that, so.
So they just cleaned out the mine, you think, and left because they couldn't get any more coal out of the ground or what?
The bottom fell out of coal.
Yeah.
They actually, when I was a little boy, I think in '51, some of you can remember it, they had a railroad strike. And there was several guys here in town, maybe I can think of their name, I was a little boy, Cowboy, somebody. And they had a caravan of like 12 or 13 coal trucks, went all the way to Joliet, Illinois, and took coal up there and sold it on the streets for so much a bushel. I remember Dad was one of them.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of coal back then.
What about the Ashby family?
There was several Ashbys. You had Guffey Ashby, who died real young. He had a son, Bob Ashby, who's in Louisville now, runs a tar shredding company up there and does quite well, picks tars up all over the state and quite wealthy. And then there was, he had two sisters, Clara Jo and I can't remember the other name.
Cora Marie.
Cora Marie, yeah, Clara and Cora Marie. Cora Marie died and then Clara Jo passed away years ago. And then on the other side you had Morse Ashby, who worked at Fort Knox, and he had two boys and a girl. And the girl's name was Juanita. And she and her husband ran the mortuary funeral home at Clarkston until she passed away. And then Bill was the older boy. He retired from International Harvest. He had a heart attack real young. And then Bob retired GE, and he had a heart attack real young. So they were right where the reload is. I bought their property and turned it into the reload. But that was all of the Ashbys that was ever in Bill. I don't know where they came from, but they were there when I was a little boy. That was not a big family, but they were pretty well off. Working, you know, if you worked at Fort Knox, you was in pretty good shape back in those days. The Kensers was a big family. Jollibee and Efton, of course, was railroaders, and then John Kenser, he had a couple of boys and a couple of girls. They lived there back. Penny Kenser, I think. Harry was his name. The Cruises was a pretty good-sized family and had money at one time. George Cruz was the old man and had a boy named Guy Cruz. He worked Willis Brothers as long as I could ever remember.
What about the Allens in Allens Lake?
They moved to Millwood and opened the lake in 1957,
That's close.
pretty close. I was in high school. I worked up there.
Well, I remember this is 54.
Yeah.
54.
Could have been. I can't remember, but I worked there the year they opened. The first 4th of July weekend that they had 1,000 paid admission
My goodness.
at 50 cents a head. Now, that was making money. Rachel didn't let anyone collect the money. She didn't do anything but collect the money, and Rachel took care of the money. They were the biggest influence on kids I guess Grayson County has ever had. Rachel and Brack Allen, they were just...
My brother worked there when he was in high school, Terry, because we lived right there 2 doors down.
yeah, right down below.
Yeah.
They came to Millwood from Caneyville. Brack was lived in Rough River, moved to Caneyville, and farmed and became judge, wasn't he? Yeah, he was the county judge when he lived in Caneyville, and then built the lake and became the city judge, I think, here in Litchfield. I'm almost sure he was. I got a speeding ticket one time, and he said, if I didn't know you, I'd lock you up. If you ever do it again, you're going to jail. Brack was good for the kids, oh, he really was good for
And
the
then
kids.
they had a drive-in theater there.
Had a drive-in theater, they had a skating rink, and the swimming hole was great things for the kids. They started the theater.
Where was that?
Yeah, right there on
Where the telephone office is you start up on the left there, just past the, Ashland Station, Pat Brooks is there. There was a Willis dealership, their Jeep dealership, it's in there, one of those old buildings, and then the old theater was the next one, and then the drive-in theater was just past. Now, he didn't have the drive-in theater, that was Betty Beatty.
Well, Brack had Mary Jane.
He had Mary Jane, and she bought it from Brack when he come to Litchfield, and then she opened the drive-in theater. They had the first movie of Elvis Presley, and God, I didn't think I'd ever forget the name of it. But anyway, she gave $50 for that. I worked for her. She gave $50 for that film. We showed it Friday night at 6 o'clock. We showed it again at 9 o'clock, and we showed it again at midnight. We showed it Saturday at 10 o'clock. We showed it again at noon. We showed it at 4 o'clock, and we showed it again that night at 9 o'clock. And we showed it twice on Sunday afternoon.
Well, love me tender.
Love me tender, that was the name of it. But anyway, she gave $50, and everybody talked about it. It was unheard of to give $50 for a film, but she probably made at least $1,000 or $1,500 off of it.
She knew what she was doing.
She's a very intelligent lady. Well, I thank you all, and
Well, look,
Thank you.
what I said in the beginning, Randy is the authority on things in Millwood. Turned out to be true. Thank you, Randy. We appreciate it. Refreshments in this room in a minute.